This podcast is hosted by the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, USA, which is about a mile from the former grounds of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. We are working to bring honest interpretations of the Carlisle Indian School that was in operation from 1879 until 1918. We honor the 7,800 Indigenous students from across the United States who came to Carlisle. The Indian School is a significant place of remembrance for our Native peoples because of the endurance, strength, and prayers from our people who went to the Carlisle Indian School. Many of us are here today.
I hope you know I'll never break your heart.
Guatsi, hi everyone. I'm glad that you're here today to share a story. I have a special guest, a special relative here today, Dr. Darren Lone Fight. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Doing good. You're my first official person here, relative.
I feel honored.
To
Thank
join
you.
space. I think it's very fitting. You've been a great mentor to help me transition into this position as the executive director for the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples. I really respect you and honor you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I feel the same way about you, and I'm so glad that you're here.
Thanks. I think it's so fitting that you're my first guest because you have set a lot of the groundwork here in Carlisle for me to come and for relatives to come here. I think it's really important to center and to ground ourselves here. So I'd love to hear more about you. So tell us who you are.
Sure. Let me introduce myself in Hidatsa. So Madashi Te Sha Tu Het. It means my name is Wolf's Head. And that was the name I was given by my family. Mizawache. I'm a member of the Dripping Drip clan, and then I'm also a child of a Pukawaga, which is the Low Cap clan. That means that's my father's clan. My mother's clan were matrilineal, so I take her clan. I'm from Fort Berthold, from Mandaree, specifically is kind of where we, within Fort Berthold is where we call home. And, I moved around a lot. I went to school at the University of North Dakota. We would go back and I went to high school as well, which is in Grand Forks, North Dakota. It's a few hours from the res. And a lot of my early teen years and when I was younger was constantly going back and forth between the res and Grand Forks where we were living and often visiting my grandpa and stuff. I sort of grew up with my grandpa. He is and always was a very important person to me and, was in my life very often and still is. From there, we moved to Massachusetts where I got my PhD. So we were out there for the better part of a decade. I find myself in Carlisle.
Grand Forks, we have a connection there. My mom actually went to the University of North Dakota. I lived in Grand Forks for several years.
So she's familiar with the cold.
Yeah, very small town. I was surprised that you could leave your car running and be okay too.
And sometimes you had to. It's so cold there.
We both share this space in a very, very powerful way. We're both here in Carlisle, and we both come here for different reasons. And, given the history of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which was in operation from 1879 to 1918, the grounds are only about a mile from where we are recording right now here on Dickinson campus. So I'm really curious to know why Carlisle? Why are you here today?
It was kind of a difficult decision. So when the time came, I was on the job market. And of course, when you're on the job market, you apply to, dozens of places. And there were a few kind of places that it looked like I was likely to get a job offer. And one of them was much closer to home, to Fort Berthold. And then Dickinson College was one of the other main contenders that I was looking at. Partially it came here because I talked to my grandpa. I was actually born in Salem, Oregon, even though I call Fort Berthold home, because my grandpa was working at the Chemawa Indian School, which was a former federal off-reservation boarding school. So Carlisle is the kind of progenitor of all these other schools, but they expanded pretty rapidly. And I think by the 1920s, 3/4 of all Indigenous children in the United States were attended or had attended federally funded off-reservation boarding schools. So they're kind of all over the place. And that doesn't even include the religious boarding schools that had a similar mission and mandate, and state schools and so forth. So my grandpa was at Chemawa partially kind of reconfiguring and revising what that school meant and to make it more Indigenous serving and to make it more aligned with Indigenous goals for education. And in that sense, it's kind of a family tradition, I guess, to go into these spaces and look to kind of refunction and think about ways in which we can kind of salvage aspects or elements of this program, which was a large program and versions out into global dimensions. Really, I mean the boarding school model, of course, goes up to Canada and Australia, and so it ends up being fairly widespread as a way to kind of raise cultural identity for Indigenous peoples in areas around the world. I talked to him, and the basic message was there's good work to be done there. And it's kind of how I felt too. I thought, the fact that it is Carlisle was actually part of the reason that it was compelling to me. There are other reasons too that are just more related to, I like liberal arts educational institutions. I just like the way that small courses are designed. It's very student-centered and so forth. There's an American Studies department here, which was very important to me. As an interdisciplinary scholar, I was really looking for a place that I could fit into a lot of departments, but I would be most comfortable in a place that respects and understands the idea of interdisciplinary work. Those are the more professional reasons. That there was just, I was kind of called here. I felt like I had this opportunity, this chance that I could take my education and I could even kind of combine my professional aspirations with doing something that would serve the people directly and very broadly speaking, like Indigenous peoples more broadly by coming here. And I felt important to me for some reason to be on the other side of the educational experiment, to have an Indigenous person here teaching. So the Indigenous people are the ones teaching rather than being taught to, I thought was a powerful statement. So that was pretty compelling for me as well.
That is really powerful. I mean, there's so many mixed experiences of our relatives who went to the Carlisle Indian School. Mm-hmm. And it's quite an adventure being here. Yes. But I do want to know a little bit more too. What is it like to be a professor here at Dickinson College, where the majority of the students here are non-native and our undergraduate students, about 2,200 students? What is it like to be a professor here?
It kind of felt lonely for a bit, to be honest. I mean, I was the first tenure-track Indigenous tenure-track faculty at the college. And as you noted, there's just not a lot of Native or Indigenous students. There was felt a little lonely to begin with. I think some of that is shifting, obviously, with you here, and we have other faculty that have been hired that are Indigenous, which has been really important. In some sense, I would say that I was a little bit shocked when I first got here at just how little people in the community, as well, like in the community more broadly within the borough of Carlisle, but also within the Dickinson College community, the level of awareness about the Carlisle School and what it meant and what it did was, I would say, fairly low. Obviously, there were faculty that were interested in this topic that knew a lot about it, and our archivist knows a lot about it. Other faculty members, administrators, there was a kind of dearth of knowledge about it. Usually it would be as much as like, they knew that the Carlisle School was here and they knew that it was bad, or sometimes within the community what I would hear, I just kind of spent a lot of time like kind of working around in the community and just kind of getting a sense of what people knew about it. And the sense from the community more broadly was, if they knew about it at all, was that the Carlisle School was here and they had a really good football team and Jim Thorpe was amazing and the best athlete. And that was kind of the beginning and the end of the knowledge base. With students, similar. I mean, there's not a huge knowledge base about it. And I saw that as a real opportunity. I was like, well, part of what I do as an educator is I help bring topics that I think are important or critical for people to know about, and I share them, and we think about that and reflect on these things. With the students, it's been a wonderful experience to sort of open their eyes to some of these things and work on research projects with them. I've worked with a research assistant on looking at both the Hampton and Carlisle Indian schools, and students are often surprised, but I would also say that when students learn about it, they want to know more, and they really are appreciative of thinking about the Carlisle School and what it means more broadly in terms of the relationship to the United States, the various tribal nations in the country, and thinking about what culturally erasure really means in terms of the damage that it does, and thinking about it across, through generations. And so students have, felt like they were almost thirsty for a knowledge they didn't know that they didn't know. And so it's been really valuable and very rewarding to get the opportunity to work with students and help them learn more about that, since they seem to already have that interest.
Before the podcast here, we were at the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples, and we have this long conference table that can fit 10 plus people. And it was cool to see you engage with the students here. And there was just such a natural connection that you've built, and I could definitely already see the rapport. I mean, I've only been here for like a few months, but it was really powerful to see the connection that you have with the college students who are here and just laughing and joking at grandma's house. So I think it's a really powerful testament to how you have built that community here with our students and with our staff and faculty. Much kudos to you, much love to you. And
thank you.
I'm learning from you how to do that here. And it's grappling with Carlisle Carlisle
Yes.
is quite a adventurous experience.
Agreed.
And a lot of times here I do share a story too about sometimes what it feels like to be a spectacle here in Carlisle.
Mhm.
It is a really powerful experience and very comforting to know that you're here and we have another relative, Keola, and other students here too who identify as Indigenous and people in the community too, which I've learned that there are, of course, folks who are Indigenous that are near Carlisle in Pennsylvania and neighboring states. And I think that's really powerful for this connection. And when I think about connecting, I think about being a relative. So I'm curious to know what it means to you to be a relative here in Carlisle.
Well, I don't know if our definitions are exactly the same. I was always sort of brought up to think about things that are in relation to me, and I'm sure we have a kind of similar definition of it. People think relatives and they think like blood relatives or like close family. When I think of relatives, I think all things that are in relation to me. So all my relations, not just people or but also like non-human people and the area around me and students and faculty and everyone. To be a good relative, I think, is to be supportive and to be understanding. As a teacher, I really try to emphasize the idea of like personal exigency or intellectual sovereignty, that I want to support students in doing what they are called to do, what they feel compelled or interested in. And being a good relative as a professor in that way is really important to my pedagogy, really. I mean, it's about, I think about the Carlisle School a lot, and I basically think, okay, so how can I do the opposite of that? And so I'm not trying to teach students what to think. I'm trying to teach them how to think. And I think that being a good relative in my position as an educator really comes down to that, which is the idea that learning to follow as a teacher rather than leading. In an ideal world, halfway through the semester, the class would almost not need me because they're so compelled and motivated by their own interests, by their own desires and demands of what they want from their education, and that I've helped facilitate that by giving them the tools to pursue it. So I try to be a good relative in that way, which is kind of how I was brought up with my parents and my grandpa and so forth, were, they never really told me what to do. Whenever I said I wanted to do something, they always found ways to help me do it. And I feel like that's the kind of role that I try to play. So I'm not trying to turn students into anything that they don't want to be. I just want to help them become the best person that they already want to be or that they already are. And then more broadly, I think, it's being a good relative for people in the community and Indigenous communities in the area or across the country. It's a very poignant or very important side of memory, I guess, is one way to put it. And being a good relative in that way, I think, is about providing support and providing places to kind of reflect and think, and also to know that you're not alone. Again, I think feeling that loneliness in my first year, and that was partially because it was also in the middle of COVID. So everything was remote. Yeah, so it was fairly isolating. And I think that the idea of being a relative or being in relations was the kind of modality had shifted. Everything was online and nothing was in person, and I'm a very in-person kind of person. So so that was tough. And I think that in some sense was almost like the externalization of the internal feeling of being in Carlisle, even when we're in person and everything is relatively normal and so forth. I felt a sort of sense of isolation here. It's like a shock trooper, as the first one to land and try to make space and place for Indigenous peoples as they come through. And part of what I wanted with the center was that it be a place of comfort and collaboration and collectivity and reflection. And there just really wasn't anywhere like that in this town. And of all towns, there was nowhere here that was like that. And so that seemed really important to me. And I try to keep myself in relationship to the Carlisle School in multiple ways. It's a pretty heavy thing. I think I'm connected to it by water. So we live near near a stream that goes straight through the Carlisle barracks. And I just kind of like try to be in relation to both the history of the place, but also how it is now. So I try not to let myself be completely blinded by the burdensome entity that is the Carlisle Indian School, and to see the positive things as well, and the interesting elements of the community and the beauty, the natural beauty of the area, and the rolling hills and the trees. And if I dwell too much on just the Carlisle Indian School, it sometimes turns bad on me, and it makes me dark and kind of morose and sometimes angry. I try to keep my view on the horizon and make sure that my vantage is wide so that I don't get too lost in it.
I really identify with you too, that it can be very challenging here because you're navigating through so many emotions as we're here as Indigenous peoples grappling with Carlisle. And as we mentioned before at the beginning of the podcast, we're only about a mile away from the former grounds of the Indian School. Just acknowledge and really respect and honor how you have a desire to build community, a place of comfort and love and healing. And that leads me to my next question is, considering how the Center for the Futures of Native People was established last year in 2023, can you share more about the creation story of the center, why it's here, how it all came about, and which leads to my journey and how I'm connected here. So if you could share a little bit more about our creation story for that center.
Sure. Well, I mean, it was something that was on my mind when I first came, right? I mean, it was like there were kind of two compelling reasons. One, the Carlisle Indian School was here, and I didn't see anywhere that was designed to, any place that was sort of designed to encounter that within a space that was for Indigenous peoples and ideally by Indigenous peoples. I basically wrote up a, 7, 8, 9-page vision document, and I just said, this is what we need, and this town needs it, this college needs it. Another compelling reason was that Dickinson College is one of the few colleges or universities in the country that has a close relationship with the Carlisle Indian School at the very least, and with federal boarding schools. There's some schools that have relationships with them, but with the Carlisle School, Dickinson College, the president of the college gave the first sermon at the Carlisle Indian School. They would shuttle students to and from, often the trains going to the Carlisle Indian School. The president of this college also sat on boards that were acquiring land for the Carlisle Indian School. And in the 60s, former Carlisle Indian School land was given to the college for the sumly price of $1, as long as they used it for educational purposes for, I think, 2 decades, and at which point it became fully owned by the college. And my understanding is it was then sold to a commercial developer for over a couple of $1 million and put into the college's coffers, so to speak. With all that in mind, I was just like, this college, I felt like it owes to do something to broaden the scholarship, to broaden the ways in which we can go about reflecting on the school, to serve Indigenous peoples, to facilitate that kind of, I don't want to call it closure, but to serve the ability for Indigenous peoples to come and reflect and to pray and to think about what that school did and how it affects us even today. The vision document basically laid this out. I mean, it laid out the relationship between the college and the Carlisle Indian School. It laid out, why this is important and what we need to do, all these kind of things. And then from there, I was constantly saying we need to find funding. Put me in a room. And my hair was really on fire about this. I was like, I want to get this done. And so the former dean, Neil Weissman, was able to get me an audience with some of the upper people at the Mellon Foundation. I met with them over Zoom and I gave a pitch, which was basically what I just said. And I tried to make a really compelling case for it and to explain to them that this is really, this is really critical, and it is public humanities. I mean, this is the core of what good public humanities should be doing is thinking about these things and facilitating them by creating spaces that are comforting and designed to facilitate Indigenous kind of reckoning with that past and that history and that present, and thinking about, as we think towards the future for Indigenous peoples, where we want to go. And it's like, I don't know, maybe it's just a MHA thing or an Indigenous thing, but it's like you just want to bring people together and be with them and figure out, so where are we going from here? I ended up getting that fairly sizable grant, had to write a whole grant. I'm not like, grant writing is not like my favorite genre to write in or anything, but and it was successful, and so we got the money. And I will say, I was the interim director by choice, because I did recognize too in myself that there's a big difference between getting the kind of like clearing the space. I sometimes think about it as like grass dancers. If you know grass dancers, part of what they do is they go out first and they dance and they lay down the grass, and so they dance in this spiral that opens up the space for if you're going to have a powwow or a celebration that the other dancers will then use as their dance space. So those grass dancers need to come in first and lay the grass down, but that's not that's just to facilitate others. And there's a big difference between making that space and sort of getting something going, and then also then executing it well and running it and doing everything like that. And I realized that I'm just not as good at that second part. I'm a little bit better at the sort of like punching in there and making some space, but then utilizing it and knowing the best ways to go forward isn't necessarily my strength. So that's partially why I was like, we were looking for somebody to take over, and like, you are amazing at it and you do all these things that I was just like, I had this kind of hazy vision for it, but I needed somebody that had a more crystallized vision of it and where could get it done. And it's just like watching the transformation and evolution of the center, even over these few months, it just makes me so happy. It actually makes me like tear up a little bit. It's like I'm so happy that you're here, and the work that you've done already has been incredible, and you're doing the the work that I didn't quite know how to do or get done. And it's such a pleasure to see. So I think that brings us up most of today. I mean, what have your experiences been over the last few months as you kind of take over and move things along? I know you're early in the process, but you've already done so much.
I really appreciate that feedback. The story that you shared about the grass dancer and how I can see how you laid down the groundwork. For example, our center is a 3-story house. It's been around since the Civil War times, which is very different to me. The architecture here on the East Coast is so different to me, especially here in Pennsylvania. Yeah. We had this house, like when I came into the job here about 3.5 months ago, the house was already there. And for those who may not know, in higher education, sometimes getting space for different initiatives or centers can be very difficult. And so when I came into this role, the space was there and the very spirit, and you talked about your grandfather and your family, the cultural values and family values that I have too also really prepared me to come into this space where I knew when I went into the 3-story house that I wanted to make it like grandma's house. Yeah. Like I'm not a grandma, I'm a granddaughter. And so going to grandma's house is a place of healing, a place of comfort, a place of joy and laughter. And so I knew that I just wanted to decorate it like my grandmas do at home in New Mexico. And I think that as you laid the groundwork, there was like one example that came to mind. There was this, so the house has gone through different versions and phases of people coming in and out over the years. Yeah. And there was this picture, right? When you come into the house, it is Asian inspired work.
Yeah, it's
and a geisha, yeah. So, and it's this like 5 foot by like 4 feet wide. Yep. It's a really big picture that was installed there in the house, who knows when, but definitely was not, it doesn't fit within grandma's house in the sense of inviting our Indigenous relatives and beyond, like to this space. Last year, there was a lot of conversation about it, working with colleagues at the Trout Gallery. And when I got here, and our administrative assistant gave me some background about it. And so I talked to one of our relatives at the Trout Gallery, and kid you not, we talked about it. The next day, the person came in, took down the framing for it. And so we already like moved for it. Within like a week, we got that taken care of. But I know there was a lot of groundwork before that, because it was like, well, how do you take care of this art piece? I know there was a lot of labor in that, labor of love to get that taken care of and removed properly. It took like less than a week to get all that ready to go. And now we have a large tribal map there of North America. Yeah. And it is powerful. As students come in, they just stop and they look at the walls because it's filled with our tribal map and pictures of the archival photos and photographs of our Indigenous people and communities. And that's like one example I was thinking about of how you've already laid the groundwork for the house and the space, as well as even for the connections too. Like there's so much love that I'm getting from our community, and you're like, hey, you should meet with them, connect with them. And so those relationships have already been cultivated for me to come in, and it's been very, very welcoming and very, very exciting to meet all the different relatives here on campus. Just respect that. And it is a jarring place for me still here in Carlisle. Sure. I don't know if I'll ever feel really settled being here in Carlisle. My relatives remind me that I did choose to come here, and I think that's important to recognize, because a lot of our relatives who came here, our Indigenous relatives, didn't have a choice to come to Carlisle. But today I do have a choice, and I am here, and I chose to live in Carlisle mainly because our college is so small and the community builds so quickly, and I wanted to be a part of that building process and to connect quickly. So I am glad that I chose to be here, to live in Carlisle, which is about 6 or 7 minutes away from the actual former grounds of the Carlisle Indian School. I just recognize like how this is a team effort, how we're working together and using our different gifts and skills to help build the center and to build out this space. And for those who may not know, like we are so close to the college, and our colleague Jim Gerenser, who runs the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center, and his wife Kate have been here for decades to cultivate and to make archives available and easily accessible for Indigenous people and beyond. We are a part of the disinterment process that's happening, and that's happening this month, which is public information, but then also last year too, and working with tribal delegates. And that is very heavy work. Yes. And I communicate and share with some of my relatives back home that even though my career has been in higher education as like a student affairs practitioner, when I'm here in Carlisle, I sometimes don't feel like I'm working within a college, because this other layer of trauma, this other layer of healing and this other layer of ceremony. So that's what makes being here in Carlisle really different for me, professionally and personally. I'm just really glad that we're here, Darren, together and with our other relative, Keola, too, who's Native Hawaiian, and getting to know other students, too, who are Indigenous, who identify as Indigenous. And it's been just really powerful, especially as folks have come back. Like the summer was a little lonely. Because everybody leaves, it seems like. But it did give me a lot of time to prepare for what's happening now, especially like with the disinterments happening here in the month of September.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredibly heavy work, but it's like you share the burden, right? I mean, I think that's part of that process is to be there in whatever way that you're asked to be there, or in whatever way you can help. By empathizing, you're experiencing that trauma with them, each time, and that can be really difficult. I have people from MHA that are buried in the cemetery. In fact, when I did my job talk here, I used to run a lot before I hurt my ankle. And so the morning of my job talk, this is how close the Carlisle School is. I just ran down there in the morning. So I took a run. I went and fed my relatives and prayed and ran back to campus, showered up, and then went to the job talk. So it's very proximal. It's very there. And I don't feel like there's ever been a time where I'm not sort of conscious of the fact that the Carlisle School is there. It's kind of always, haunting the horizon, so to speak, or it's like where I'm literally at for whatever reason I'm there, whether it's a tour or to go to the cemetery. So. And I took a pause from that for a while because it was kind of following me home, is what my parents said, and that I needed to be more careful about how I spent my time there, and that I needed to be better prepared, and talk to me about how for that kind of work with a cemetery like that, we have people who spend their whole lives to be able to do the important work in those kind of places. And I haven't spent that time, right? I'm not somebody who does that. It was kind of nice. My parents were basically like, you need to stop going for a little bit until you come home, and you need to get centered, and then you need to just kind of be aware of that. It's a powerful place, and it's a place that you have to be aware of what you're exposing yourself to, and those spirits wanting to go home, sometimes that makes it even more important to be very, very aware of what you're doing when you're there.
I think that's really important to recognize. I think a lot about how to provide resources or share stories about other Indigenous relatives who will come to Carlisle in the future. In my opinion, coming here is not, both logistically and emotionally and spiritually, it's not an easy place to come to.
Yep.
And even just like a flight from Albuquerque to Carlisle will easily be like $500 round trip. And that is a lot of money to come here to Carlisle, and to drive here too. It takes a lot. And I, very cognizant too, like of how I occupy here in Carlisle, occupy space, because I don't have kids or have a partner. Like it's just me here. And even when I moved here, I shared some story before, like how I was very intentional about even the space that I lived in. I did not want it to look like Carlisle,
right,
no basement, no attic, no long hallways, and not haunted. So those, I'm happy to report that all those requirements were fulfilled. So
good.
Yeah. Do you have any other advice for those Indigenous relatives who are planning to come to Carlisle in the future or want to come to Carlisle?
I think, noting that it's heavy, and that I think that, some people are really prepared for that. I think it hits people sometimes unexpectedly, and to just be ready to be maybe a little surprised by the emotional response that it evokes. I also think that there's not really any right or wrong way to go about it. And I think that it doesn't, I see people deal with it differently, and that's partially cultural differences. I also see people deal with it differently just because of their position or perspective or standpoint on the Carlisle School. And, for me, I just try to remind people that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way, except for that which is kind of defined by you and your people, and how you want to approach that, and then just to try to be supportive of that. So I do think that there's it can really hit people, and they can be kind of shocked about it. We had somebody who had come out, and I went with her to the Carlisle School, and it was a really tough experience for them, and kind of debriefed about it a little bit later. And one of the things she mentioned is it just caught her by surprise. Like, she thought she had read about it, she'd seen pictures, she'd done, research and knew all this stuff, but then when you're in that physical place and you're in connection and in relation to that, it's different, and it can be very heavy, and it can be very very difficult in ways that it's almost hard to prepare for. And I think that's okay. And I think that's totally to be expected, or a reasonable response. And so that's something that I think that people should be aware of, when they're coming out. For some people, it's easier. I mean, and I don't, there's no right way or wrong way. It's just a heavy place.
I think that's important to acknowledge, because coming here to Carlisle for the first time, it's such a different place. Like, and when I say different, it's when you come to Carlisle, sometimes you'll see different elements that are commemorated, like even in downtown Carlisle. Like you'll see kind of this headstone looking thing that honors Jim Thorpe.
Yeah.
And you walk down a little bit of ways and there's a bookshop that has Jim Thorpe blown up on a book cover of Path Lit by Lightning. And you'll cruise a little bit further, walk down this alleyway, and you see these two metal, stereotypical looking natives, one that says Carlisle. Have you seen these?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. One that says Carlisle, one that says Indian, and they're like in the back alleyway.
Yeah.
That's like an interesting. I don't know why those are there.
There's Indian head logo.
Yeah.
There's this old decrepit, which is the case for most malls, I guess, nowadays. But there's an old mall, and I think there's only like 2 businesses that are open there anymore. Oh. But if you go there, because everything's closed, me and my daughter was kind of urban exploring, I guess. It's open, but it's just there's not many businesses in there. They have this huge mural, which is like the history of Carlisle, and there's like a white guy stabbing an Indian, and it's just like, I can't even describe it, but it might be worth going to see just for the experience. It's pretty crazy. And I think that it's a town that is so kind of self-memorializing around certain things, you see this is where George Washington talked to his troops, and so you see a lot of historical markers, but the markers for the Carlisle School or for Indigenous presence, in this area is very limited. And I think that that's a problem. And I think that it's something that is going to be a longer term goal or project, but to get more memorialization and also just kind of recognition of Indigenous presence and the Carlisle School within the town would be important. It's a difficult history, and people don't necessarily want to celebrate it, and I think when people don't want to celebrate, like people in the community don't want to celebrate it, I'm actually kind of like, okay, well, that's good, because at least that it's bad, right? It's like, you're at least aware enough that it's not something to be like Yahoo about. But yeah, the Jim Thorpe stuff, you'll see it a lot. There was like a place where people would rent their tuxes for prom, and there's obviously the Carlisle Barracks is an active military leadership training facility. So this is where they'd go to get their suits and stuff for events. And that was like, I walked in there once, and the guy was like, we were talking, and he was like, well, this is where Jim Thorpe used to come. And, he had all these stories about Jim Thorpe coming in, and he used to sit there and talk. And he had just tons of Jim Thorpe and Carlisle School memorabilia kind of up above where all the suits and stuff were. And that place closed, but it was kind of an interesting little, in terms of just getting a sense of the community or whatever. If that place had been open, I would have already taken you there, because it's kind of an interesting little historical dive in terms of like the cultural, like the community climate or the community sentiment around that.
There's an antique shop that I went to recently, because I've been looking for different, photos and different box crates to put in grandma's house to decorate. And I went to this large antique shop here in downtown Carlisle.
Oh, the one that's like 3 floors?
I also went to that one. It was a different one. Yeah. Should I say the name or not? Just kidding. But this antique shop, I literally walked through the whole shop, and it was hot. If you don't know, humidity is real here.
Oh, yes.
I am not used to humidity. I will take the dry heat any day.
Absolutely. I'm with you.
Yeah. And so at this antique shop, you walk to the corner underneath the stairs, and there is a case of Carlisle Indian School items. And that includes photographs, like a plate. And it made me really mad when I first saw it, because it made it seem like we are antiques, and we're not.
Right.
We are obviously right here talking. We're, descendants of many people who've gone to boarding school, not only just here in Carlisle, but just across. There are so many of our Indian people who've gone to boarding school who are descendants. And I don't know, it just made me, it was unsettling to see that. As I'm very aware too, as I go around the town just to see, I mean, just across the state of Pennsylvania too, just how our Native people are portrayed and depicted. And a lot of times it is very stereotypical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I moved to Massachusetts too, and in some ways it's like, a lot of my people ended up going to Hampton, and they would be sent on these outing trips, and those outing trips were in Western Massachusetts where I was living. So it's like I'm kind of almost going in reverse of the trail that a lot of my people went. So it's like, they would get taken to Carlisle and then their outing would take them from Carlisle to Western Mass. When I was up there, one of the things, moving from North Dakota was like, in North Dakota, I guess I felt like there was a lot more kind of overt racism against actual like Native people there. And then moving to Massachusetts, it was like this kind of, they were still in this kind of like the myth of the noble savage, like kind of idea of what Native peoples are, and very much the past tense, like they were instead of they are. And I felt like that, it's similar to how it is here in Pennsylvania as well, this very kind of like the historical Native, the kind of mythologized Native as well. Those kind of tropes are pretty strong on the East Coast.
I'm learning a lot about that, and especially like because the history here seems to be really documented. It's even, I think,
parts
about
of it.
like Gettysburg, right? Like that is like a significant place in a time in American history. And it's only like 45 minutes from us, but like the number of people that pass there is significant. And I often process too, like, Darren and I, we come from two very different tribal communities and peoples, and we don't represent all of Native America.
No.
But we are here, sharing our own perspective and story. And as you mentioned, Darren, I think it's so important that, there's no right or wrong. I think that's a great way to describe coming here to Carlisle and how we process and understanding that there are so many different tribal peoples, federally recognized, state recognized communities here in the United States, and that we all have different languages, tribal communities, religious practices, ways of and customs and regarding life and death and everywhere in between. And so I think that's just so important to recognize. And as we navigate these spaces here in Carlisle and beyond. As we come kind of to a close here, I just wanted to ask if there is anything else that you would like to share as we have shared story here and made new connections, and anything else you'd like to share.
I just want to say thank you again thank you to you, Mandy, for being here and coming to Carlisle and taking over the reins of the CFNP and taking it where you want to go. I'm just like, it makes me so happy, and I've been so pleased to sort of see the transformation of the center. I really think that the center is really important, and I'm glad that you share that view and that you're working to make it something that will be a place, like you said, like Grandma's house. I mean, that's just such a perfect description of the kind of the tone of the space, the way that it feels there. It feels so warm and inviting, and that's because you're warm and inviting, but it's also because you kind of externalized that element and made the center a more welcoming place and more welcoming space. So I would say that people should come visit and come check things out and see what Mandy's up to, and it's a cool project, and I think that it's great what you've done.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And for those who may not know, I actually have been connected to Darren's family before I even knew Darren.
That's right.
And his sister, I went to school with at the University of Arizona and have known for over a decade. And it's amazing, like how small our world is.
Totally.
And I went to graduate school with Darren's sister and spent many, many hours studying and working through our comprehensive exams, and we're both in higher education, and got to know her really well. I didn't even know when I was applying for this job that I was going to be connected to her relative, and so I think it's definitely not by mistake, and that we are connected in so many different ways. And it's just such an honor to be here to share space with you, share stories as we create a place here for our Indian people and beyond. And it's just remarkable to be in a place where there are a lot of people, native, non-native, who want to learn more about the history of the Indian school and to really grapple with that and to figure out how we can move forward and heal together and, give the honest interpretations of what the school was and is and how it still impacts us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, you being in higher education, I feel like that's, both of us being in higher education, it's like the vestiges of the boarding schools are still kind of with us. And I think that's it's interesting to be here in this place and to be thinking about the question of education and higher education, especially for Indigenous peoples.
Dawaya, thank you so much, Darren. I appreciate you coming to this little podcast room here at Dickinson College.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, and we honor our relatives who went to the Carlisle Indian School and those who are coming this month in prayer and in ceremony. And I'm just so glad that we're here together, Darren, to navigate this with our relatives here, with our community. opportunity. And so with that, thank you, Dawae. That's how we say thank you in our language. We look forward to connecting again. So thanks for listening to our podcast. Listen for more episodes, and we look forward to chatting and connecting with you. Everyone, have a good day.
Have a good day.
If you want to learn more about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, visit the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center at carlisleindian.dickinson.edu. Much love to our relative Superman, who is from the Apsulake Nation, located in Montana. This episode features his song, I Hope You Know, featuring Ashley Hall. Superman, also known as Christian Takes Gun Parish, is an award-winning music artist, Native American dancer, and innovative hip-hop artist. He has dedicated his life to empowering and spreading a message of hope, pride, and resilience through his original art form. Learn more about Superman at supermanhiphop.net, and you spell Superman Supaman. Follow him on Instagram and YouTube at Superman Hip Hop, on TikTok at Superman TikTok, and on Facebook. Listen to his music on your favorite streaming service near you, and check out his clothing brand, Good Medicine Clothing, at goodmedicineclothing.com. Special thanks to Dr. Darren Lone Fight for joining me for this podcast episode. Many thanks to Brenda Landis for teaching me the technical process of producing a podcast. Learn more about the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at dickinson.edu/CFNP. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X at CFNP Dickinson. Authenticity is important. You can also learn more about me at amandacharmiah.com, and you spell my last name CHEROMIAH. You can also connect with me at drchairmaya on TikTok, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. You can also email me at CHEROMIA@dickinson.edu. I honor my 5 relatives that I know of so far who came to the Carlisle Indian School. Because of them, I am here. In the words of Chief Philip Whiteman Jr. from Northern Cheyenne and a descendant from the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, he says, I love you and there is nothing you can do about it. Hashjame gume dawae. Thank you so much for listening, relatives. Until next time.